What's up, friends? My name is Jose, aka Joe Engineer, and welcome back to another DIY Porsche 911 suspension video series. In particular, this will be the rebuild of my rear suspension on my car. I'll be doing it in a similar fashion as the front suspension. There's a whole series of videos on that already. I'm going to take a similar philosophy back here, where I'm going to retain the torsion bar, suspension, and the kind of stock layout, but I'm going to include some stiffer poly bushings, stiffer torsion bars, quick change adjustable style spring plates so that I can dial in the right height a little bit easier. Same style of hollow quick change torsion bars here in the back as I did in the front, so that hopefully I can have the capability to swap them in and out as easily as the front. This will be applicable to generally all air-cooled Porsche 911s up through 1989, the end of the G-body generation. I think in particular, maybe like 74 through 89 has similar type of components. I believe I think 73 and earlier cars start to have slightly different trailing arms, and I think cast steel trailing arms and things like that. But in general, 74 through 89, this is kind of the sweet spot of where this that will have as many similarities to this setup as possible. This is a 1983 SC, so yeah, let's get started taking things apart. And first thing I got to do back here is I need to move my jack stands from this outer cap, torsion bar cap thing, to slightly inboard where the tube is, the chassis tube that the torsion springs are in, which is this guy right here, this tube that goes all the way across, and so that I can take apart the spring plate and get this plate off and pull the torsion bar out and the bushing and all that good stuff. But I think in order to do that, I need to remove the sway bar first, because my US Jack 6-ton jack stands have a really huge pad here. So, and I'm not sure if it's really going to clear the sway bar, so let me get this off first, and then we'll move our jack stands inboard so that we can start ripping this whole side of the car apart. All right, first thing we're gonna do is remove this lower link. Okay. All right. Okay, we got some room here now, so let me move the jack stands inboard on that tube now. Scary. There we go. Kind of like that. Good. Okay, I'm all good now. The jack stands are inboard as far as I can get them on the tube, so that I have free access to all this stuff out here outboard. The only problem that I can see is that bushing right there in the middle of the screen for the front of the trailing arm is going to be a little tight to get in there with the impact gun. I may just have to use a breaker bar and a socket, but cross that bridge when we get to it. Let's continue with the disassembly. So the next thing I need to do is to start to strip off parts from this hub. But in order to get the rotor, axle nut, and the hub itself off, I need to first get the caliper off. So what I think I'm gonna do to make as little of a mess as possible is I'm gonna follow this hard line. The caliper has a hard line attached to it, so I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna attempt to disconnect the hard line from the soft line. Once I do that, I'll pull this clip and then I'll see if I can plug the soft line with one of my brake line plugs that I made during my front suspension rebuild. Once I have this line disconnected, then I'll remove the caliper and the hard line together by taking off the 2 bolts in the back of the hub. I'm probably going to replace these. Actually, I am going to replace these soft lines with stainless lines anyway. So, all right. Clamp on there. That was easy. Yay. Let's go. Oh, that hurt. Alrighty, retaining clip is done. Now let's make a mess with brake fluid. Okay, plug this hole up to slow the leak process a little bit. This is just a piece of a old brake line cut off, and I think I put some glue in here and I squeezed it tight. It's probably not 100% foolproof, but it'll do. And same thing with this side. This is the other end, the female end of a brake line, just like this. And I'm just gonna pop this guy on here and hopefully spill as little fluid as possible. And now, time to disconnect the bolts back here for the caliper. Hopefully you can see this in the camera, but when you go behind the caliper here, rear caliper, there's the top bolt. Maybe you can get an impact gun in here, maybe not, but the one below is right there, and clearly there's no way you can get an impact gun right here. I think I got a socket and a 3/8 inch drive ratchet, I believe. In any case, probably soak these bolts in some penetrating oil, like Croil, Aero Croil, whatever, and come back and do what you got to do to get these bad boys off. So I have no idea if you can see. Hopefully you can from that angle. But what I have in my hand is a 19mm socket, 3/8 inch drive, and the way I remember doing this the last time I did this was I took the socket, I put it way down into the lower bolt. You can't see it from there, from where you are, but imagine me putting the socket over the bolt, and then there's just enough room in here to grab a 3/8 inch ratchet, get it over, engage it with the socket. Okay, now I got room. And if you need a little bit more leverage, because this is a 3/8 and it's not very long, get a teeny weeny little cheater bar to give you a tad more leverage and break it loose. There. Okay, there's the bottom one. Now we gotta do this process in reverse. Take the ratchet out, socket, and now I should be able to put it on top. And repeat the same process. Although there's more room up here for a bigger, maybe a 1/2 inch drive or small breaker bar or whatever. There we go. Let me take the bottom one off first, because I won't be able to get to it once the caliper is hanging. Wow, there's, wish there was an access hole like behind this trailing arm or something, but the hard line is in the way too, so it's a bit tough to get in here. Now let's try a 18mm ratchet wrench. You know, this actually doesn't work with a ratcheting wrench, because the piston, the inner piston on the caliper is taller than the head of the bolt, so you can't really get in here unless you've got some kind of offset wrenches. But I think I've got, yeah, I can take this bolt off now. Working blind here, but I'm taking it off with my fingers. Let's see, there's the bolt. Ta-da! And now let's do the top one. Do the top one, support the caliper, and off we go. Come on. Let's go. Get off. Aha. All right. Caliper off. It's got the hard line attached to it, so we're gonna very carefully stick it back here so we don't damage the line, and repeat this same process on the other side. Okay, both rear calipers off. Next thing we got to do is we got to start stripping the hub. We're gonna take off the rotor by removing these two screws. It'll pop off. We're gonna disconnect the axle from the hub by taking this cotter pin out and undoing this ginormous castle nut. And then we'll remove the entire parking brake assembly that's back here. It has a ton of parts in it. Okay, to get the rotor off, you gotta take off these two screws. You might need an impact driver to loosen them up. I think these, oh yeah, these are tight. Alrighty, to get this thing going, let's see, which way is it gonna go? We want it to loosen, not to tighten. Go. There you go. Alrighty. Now, parking brake off. And take the rotor off. So here is your parking brake assembly in all its glory. And before you panic, it's very similar to your standard drum brake assemblies and other parking brake assemblies in other cars, where you essentially have the cable on either side. There is a cable that connects to the handle in between the seats. When you pull the handle, this cable pulls inward towards the front of the car, pushes in, and these two little legs here will spread outward, causing this end of each pad to move outward against the inside of the drum. And on the other side, you've got the little adjuster that adjusts the amount of tension, pre-tension, that is present in the system. And then you've got a spring, a long spring back here that holds these two guys together, as well as individual springs up on top and down here on the bottom that help it return back to position and keep it from rattling around. Similarly, on the top and on the bottom, you have this spring and this cup that help keep the pads or the brake shoes against the hub and keep them from rattling around and wearing unevenly. That's all there is to it. If you'd like, you can take a bunch of pictures. I recommend actually taking a bunch of pictures of this assembly before you take it apart, and then make sure you bag and tag all these little bits so that you know how to put it back together afterwards. And for reference, I have a written procedure on how to do this on my my blog. I'll link it somewhere in the description here. But yeah, go ahead and strip all these parts off on both sides. Okay, so on the arm that connects to the end of the cable here with the little spreader arms, there's a tiny castle nut and a cotter pin. So you want to go ahead and take that off first while it's all connected, and undo this itty bitty little 10mm ta-da! Now this is disconnected from the cable, which, as you can see right there, now you can start pulling springs and stuff off. These little cups up here, there's a slot in there, and there's a kind of a T shape on the end of the little rod. What you want to do is compress the spring in, turn the cup a quarter turn, and then it'll come out and the spring will go with it. And then you can start to pull off all the rest of these little springs and things. I forget that you have to use the proper tool for this. I have no idea how to use these. Actually, I don't remove enough springs to really remember how to use them. Let's see. Okay. Alrighty, okay, alright. There we go. Didn't damage it, I think. Okay, next. Can I get in here? Maybe I can just do that. There. Okay. Adjuster off. Pads off. And we are done. These little arms will stay here on the back of this kind of a hub plate. But yeah, that takes care of it. And repeat the same process on the other side. Now you can pull the cable out. Ta-da! All right. Okay, now with your parking brake assembly removed and your parking brake cables kind of dangling out the back somewhere, I'm gonna remove this giant castle nut here. So first you want to grab thanks a lot, cotter pin. Take this big old cotter pin, get it out if you can. Alrighty. Oh boy, what size socket is that? That's a big one. Ooh, 1 3/16. I don't know what the metric equivalent will be. I'll put it up on the screen by the time this video publishes. Be forewarned, if you have never, if this nut has been on here for a long time, you may have to shoot it with some penetrating oil and heat and a couple rounds of that back and forth. Yeah, because this is torqued very highly. I'm gonna hold on to this. Let's see, I have to go that way and it's gonna want to go this way. So here we go. Alrighty. Very nice. This is the end of the stub axle that is connected to the end of the CV joint, FYI. Before I cut myself on these sharp edges, I'm going to remove the brake dust shields. They're held on with 3 short nuts and bolts. 1, 2, and 3. So I'll pop those guys off. Let's take these off. Oh, look at that. Oh, this is captive. Okay. All right. Get off. How do I take this off? Oh. Straight down, maybe. Get off. There. There's a. Oh, okay. I thought this was a separate nut, but I guess it's not. It's attached to here. Cool. All right. Next, you got to remove the end links that were attached to the sway bar. And they have a bolt that attaches to the trailing arm behind the spring plate. I had already cracked this one loose, so here we go. now apparently, oh man, we gotta take the shock off. Gotta take off the shock, pull the axle out, and then you have to press or use a drift to punch out this hub from the bearing, I guess. So yeah, off we go. Before I start to rip things apart, I'm just gonna take a quick reference measurement of the spring plates so that when I put them back together, I can more or less start at this setting and then dial it into wherever I want to go. And currently I'm seeing about 25 degrees 25 degrees from horizontal down that way with the suspension at full droop, with the shock and the spring plates and trailing arm and everything still connected. So just a mental note, just like the front, you know, take as many measurements as you can of settings before you start to rip things apart. I guess here people end up also scribing or marking the location of I think these bolts, so that they can put them back in the same orientation as before. So yeah, Bentley says I have to pull the CV out to get behind the hub to tap it out with a punch. So I'm gonna see if I can avoid messing with the axle by just disconnecting the shock and seeing if that will give me enough clearance. All right, get a little pressure off of the shock. Okay. Let's see if I can pull. Please let me pull the axle out. Let me be able to pull the axle out. Nope. Man, I was hoping I didn't have to disconnect it, but I guess I do. Oh well, good enough. Oh, heavy. Okay, axle is out. And now you got to get this hub out. Look at how much this thing moves around. Probably a great time to replace the bearings too. Look at this. Okay, so the Bentley says that we have to drive out the hub from the back with this Porsche special tool P297 or an equivalent drift. I don't have this tool, so I'm gonna grab the nearest sized socket and see if that will help me do the job. So here we are in the back of the hub, and I guess what we're trying to press out is that inner splined ring of metal riding on the inside of the bearing. So I think I can get a socket that is big enough. Oh boy, I don't have 3 hands here, but you get the idea. I have a socket that is I think is small enough and large enough to do the job. So let's give that a shot. I reconnected the shock so that this whole corner is triangulated again and doesn't want to swing that way as I smack it with the hammer. So let's see if we can pop this bad boy out. It landed on my tummy. Look at that. Socket went all the way through and this hub came out. Good deal. That looks like a bearing. I have a tool to replace the bearing here, but I also have a press, so we'll see. Maybe I'll do one of them here and one of them on the press, just to demonstrate both options. So I wasn't really planning on showing this side in the video, but I've got a bit of a challenge here. As you can see, I hope you can see, this side is extremely rusted. It looks like the OD of the hub is rusted to the ID of the bearing. And I have tried whaling on it and I absolutely cannot get it free. Another challenge over here is that the left side of the engine, the cylinder banks are further forward than the right side. There's less room in here to get a clean shot with a hammer. So I ended up having to see, because the exhaust is right here, so I can't whale on it super hard without risking smacking my heater boxes. So I think what I'm gonna do, I'll have to find out if I can pull the entire hub out with the bearing using my bearing tool here in place. If I can't, then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop the whole arm with the hub still in it, and then I'll figure out a way to fixture it on a vise or something and press out the entire hub with the bearing, and then remove the bearing off the hub later on the bench or something. But regardless, I'll have to leave this here for now, and I'll keep pressing on with the tear down of the right side. Okay, so now we're ready to disconnect the trailing arm, this guy, from the spring plate, this guy. And the Bentley manual says to scribe the position of these fasteners on the arm. By scribing, I guess that means kind of scratching the outline of each. I didn't want to do that, so I just threw some Sharpie marks all the way around. And in my case, I think I'm going to replace these. I think the adjustable arm from Elephant Racing will go here. But if you're doing a stock rebuild, then you should mark these positions before you take it apart. Then you remove these two bolts and these two bolts to free the spring plate from the cast trailing arm. Let's go back here. From behind, from downtown. Whoa. There we go. Alrighty, let's keep all these fasteners together. All right, I believe, okay, there's two snore washers. I think one of these goes under here. This one goes here. And this one, ooh, this one goes, big washer, snore washer. And the nut. Okay. Got the two eccentric bolts from the front and these two regular bolts from the back. And now this is free. And now I got to get myself way back in there. Oh geez, and remove the last bolt. The scary part is that there's a gearbox on the other side, so I don't know if I can do that without dropping the gearbox. Okay, so here is the winning combination of tools for me to get this front trailing arm nut and bolt out. First of all, this is a 915 gearbox. So I guess I'm really lucky because 915 gearboxes are smaller, narrower than G50s. So I've got the easiest setup here to service. Also, as you can see, directly behind that socket, that torsion bar tube going all the way across has a dent in it, and that dent is there so that you can withdraw the bolt effectively outboard, kind of in the space where that dent is. So these are a bolt with a 22 millimeter head and nut. The bolt is driven from the outside in, and on the inside is a nut, one of those oval prevailing torque lock nuts. So what that means is that you can't just crack it loose and then spin it off with hand, but rather, because it's oval shaped, it's always going to pinch the bolt slightly, so it's going to keep dragging and, you know, be difficult to remove the entire way out as you're threading it out. And the idea behind those nuts is that they won't vibrate themselves loose, especially in such a critical application such as this suspension member here. And also there's no room in there, so yeah, you can't afford to have this thing back out. Anyway, because the heads are 22 millimeter and there isn't a ton of space here, I needed to be absolutely sure that the fasteners, tools that I used, weren't going to damage the fasteners, because if I round off either the bolt head or the nut head, then I'm looking at having to cut the bolt out in order to remove the trailing arm. So 22 millimeters is very close to 7/8 standard SAE sockets and wrenches. Don't use those. They're a little bit too loose, and again, you risk rounding off the fastener. So what I ended up doing is I got a typical 22 millimeter box end wrench. This one's a 12 point. I put that guy in here, and you can't really, you know, normally you would hold the bolt steady and turn the nut, but in this case you can't really do that because you have this little flange that goes all the way around the mount to give it stiffness, so you don't get a lot of bite on here. Maybe if you had like an offset 22 millimeter wrench, then maybe that would work, but there's no room in here for a socket or anything. So what I ended up doing is putting a 22 millimeter box end wrench on that side, holding it still, dousing this whole thing with penetrating oil, Aerocore oil in my case, and then I use a 22 millimeter socket and a big old breaker bar all the way out here to turn the entire bolt, to hold the nut still and turn the bolt like, you know, a quarter of a turn or whatever it is here. And then once I was able to turn it, then I was able to switch to a smaller breaker bar and start working this guy loose, one partial turn at a time. But that's what I ended up using. and it thankfully worked. If you've got rusted bolts, or there's just even less clearance here, like with a G50 transmission, as long as you can get a wrench in here, you should be good. But you know, the easiest way to do this is to drop the whole engine and transmission. But assuming you don't have any rust issues, then you could probably do it like me and hold the nut with a 22mm wrench, hold it steady, and turn the head of the bolt instead. So I'm going to put the camera down and get back to removing this fastener here. And before this whole thing drops to the ground, you don't want to mess up this expensive aluminum trailing arm. So I'm going to temporarily bolt it back to the spring plate so that when I remove that, it doesn't come crashing on the floor or on my head or whatever. Switching to a 3/8 ratchet with a 22mm socket. Hello. Yay! The nut came off. And there's a washer here somewhere too. Here we go. Prevailing torque lock nut, otherwise known as an oval lock nut. Let's go. Yeah, buddy. Oh boy. Oh man, that was tough, but satisfying. Let's see if the other side is as cooperative. Man, good stuff. Finally, both of these guys are out. The left side was a little bit easier to do than the right side. There was a little bit more clearance, so I didn't really struggle there. But I highly recommend getting as many variations of 22mm sockets and wrenches as you can. For me, it took a 22mm box wrench, a big 1/2-inch breaker bar, a smaller 1/2-inch breaker bar with a 22mm socket, a 22mm socket that's 3/8 drive, a 3/8 ratchet, and then the tiny 3/8 breaker bar as well. Yeah, so if you do that and just be careful and make sure you don't round off the nut or the bolt head, then that, and with a bunch of penetrating oil, you should be in good shape to take these things off. But yeah, I think we're going to call it a day with the removal of these trailing arms. Next time we'll pick it up with the removal of the spring plates and the rear torsion bars themselves. Thank you so much for watching and supporting, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.